Imagine standing in a hospital when out of nowhere, a tiny puppy comes sprinting down the hallway, his paws slipping on the floor, his chest heaving with every breath, and his eyes are soaked in fear, begging for help like he's seen something no soul ever should. And just minutes later, the entire hospital is locked down by police. This isn't your usual rescue story. This is about a puppy who couldn't speak, but still found a way to scream for help. What made him run into that hospital? Why did he run straight to one specific doctor? And how did it all end with flashing sirens and officers surrounding the building? What this little dog reveals will leave you absolutely stunned, and maybe even in tears. It started off as just another Tuesday at St. Agnes General Hospital, the kind of day that didn't ask for attention, that blended into the background like white noise. Doctors were buried in charts. Nurses buzzed from room to room. Receptionists smiled half-heartedly at patients in the waiting room, tired from a long morning shift. The usual sounds filled the corridors. Soft beeping from machines, the distant rattle of gurney wheels, a child coughing in pediatrics. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. Just before noon, as the automatic front doors parted for a man in a wheelchair, something unusual happened. A noise, sharp and desperate, cut through the hospital's usual rhythm. Scratches, loud ones, coming from the glass doors. At first, no one moved. People glanced up from their routines, assuming maybe someone had dropped a bag or pushed a cart too close to the entrance. But then the scratching came again. More urgent this time, faster, more frantic, like someone or something was begging to be let in. Heads turned, and then everyone saw him. A tiny puppy, golden brown fur, matted and soaked from the rain. His eyes were wide and glassy, as if holding back 1,000 emotions too big for a creature so small. His ribs showed through his thin frame. His little paws trembled as he stood at the threshold of the hospital's main entrance. He looked too fragile to belong in a place like this, yet something about his presence felt deliberate, like he hadn't just wandered in off the street. He was here for a reason. The doors opened again, this time not for a patient, not for a visitor, but for him. The puppy stepped inside cautiously at first, placing one paw on the cold tile floor, then another, and then, without warning, he ran. Fast, too fast for his tiny legs, slipping and sliding across the shiny surface, skidding past stunned nurses, and dodging the legs of startled visitors. Gasps filled the air. What the was that, a dog? Someone call security. He's gonna hurt himself. But the puppy didn't care. He had no time to lose. He zipped down the main hallway, ears flattened back, leaving little wet prints behind him. Every few feet, he paused, looking around wildly, as if searching, scanning faces, listening for a voice only he could hear, desperate to find someone. And then, suddenly, he stopped, right outside room 203. Inside was Dr. Mia Lewis. She had just finished examining a young boy with a high fever and was washing her hands, completely unaware of the tiny storm of emotion rushing her way. Outside the door, the puppy's breathing was rapid. His chest heaved, but he waited, like he knew something, or someone, important was just beyond that wall. The door opened. Dr. Lewis stepped into the hallway, clipboard in hand, and then she saw him. Their eyes locked. Everything around her, nurses, patients, conversations, blurred into silence. The puppy stared straight at her, and in that moment, there was a kind of recognition. Not the kind you get from knowing someone, but the kind that says, "You're the one. You're the reason I came." Her breath caught. The puppy took one trembling step toward her, then another. His legs gave out halfway, but he kept crawling, dragging himself with a determination that didn't make sense. Not for a dog, not for a pup this small. He was running on fear, on hope, on something unspoken. Then, just as he reached her feet, he let out a single, broken sound. A whine, not loud, but full of something that made every hair on her arm stand. The hallway went completely still. A nurse whispered, "What in the world?" Dr. Lewis knelt slowly, gently placing her clipboard on the floor. Her heart pounded in her chest. The puppy looked up at her with those tear-filled eyes, then collapsed, pressing his tiny body against her shoe, like he had just found his last safe place. She picked him up, and as she did, a note fell from beneath his fur. A crumpled, damp piece of paper, tied around his neck with a strip of faded red cloth. That's when everything changed. Dr. Lewis stared at the tiny scrap of paper in her hand. It was damp and slightly torn, the ink smudged but still legible. 4 words, just 4 words, but they were enough to make her blood run cold. "Please save my mom." That was it. No name, no address, no explanation, just that quiet plea, and the quivering puppy that had delivered it. Her breath caught in her throat. The paper trembled between her fingers. Where did he come from? Someone asked behind her, but Dr. Lewis didn't answer. She was frozen, trying to make sense of what she was holding. Who sent this puppy? Why her? And why now? She looked back down at the pup. He was still clinging to her lab coat, burying his face into the soft fabric, as if trying to hide from something or someone. A nurse stepped closer, concern etched across her face. Do you think it's real? I don't know, Dr. Lewis whispered, her eyes not leaving the little dog. It didn't feel like a prank. It didn't feel like a coincidence. Something was wrong. She gently cradled the puppy and walked into the nearest staff room. The others followed, drawn by curiosity and a growing sense of unease. The pup's fur was damp against her hands, and she could feel how thin he was, how hard his heart pounded in that tiny chest. She grabbed a towel and wrapped him carefully, trying to offer him some comfort, but his eyes kept darting toward the door, like he was afraid someone would come for him. Let's check if he's chipped, someone suggested. Dr. Lewis nodded, handing him off to a vet tech who had just arrived for her lunch break. The woman scanned him gently with a handheld device, but shook her head a moment later. No chip, no ID, nothing. Silence hung in the room again. Someone muttered, "Where the hell did he come from?" But the puppy, he just stared at the door, as if waiting. Seconds later, as if answering his silent question, sirens, far off at first, but rapidly getting louder, wailing, sharp, urgent. People inside the hospital paused. Then the intercom crackled to life. "Attention, this is hospital security. Please remain calm. All exterior doors are being locked temporarily due to an active situation outside. Repeat, all exits are sealed until further notice." Dr. Lewis's stomach dropped. The puppy whimpered and hid his face again. A young nurse near the window gasped. "There are police everywhere." She wasn't exaggerating. Out front, patrol cars were pulling up to the emergency bay. Officers stepped out, some with hands resting nervously on their belts. Not in panic, but prepared, controlled, tactical, like they knew what they were walking into. "Something's happening," Dr. Lewis said under her breath. "Something big." And somehow, this tiny dog was at the center of it all. The hospital had changed. In just a few minutes, St. Agnes General went from a place of quiet healing to a place full of questions and fear. Doctors peered out of windows. Nurses clutched their clipboards a little tighter. The waiting room fell into a strange hush, everyone watching the flashing red and blue lights dance against the walls. Dr. Lewis stood frozen near the front doors, the puppy still wrapped in the towel in her arms. She didn't know what to feel. Shock, fear, a strange protectiveness had crept into her heart, like the little dog had somehow become her responsibility the second he looked into her eyes. She looked down at him again. His breathing was shallow, but steady, his head resting just under her collarbone, eyes closed, but his ears twitched at every sound from outside. "Dr. Lewis," one of the security guards called, walking up quickly. "We need you to come with us. Now." She blinked, startled. "What? Why?" "There's a detective here. He needs to speak to you, privately." "About the dog?" He didn't answer, just nodded toward the hallway. Unease twisted in her stomach. As they walked, she noticed how everyone's eyes followed her. Whispers started to build. "That's the doctor with the dog. Why are the cops here? What did that puppy do?" She entered the small security office, tucked behind the ER wing, where a tall man in a gray jacket stood with a badge clipped to his belt. Mid-40s, calm face, but sharp eyes. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked like he'd been expecting her. "I'm Detective Harris," he said, offering a slight nod. "I believe you have something, or someone that belongs to me." Dr. Lewis instinctively pulled the puppy a little closer. He ran in here on his own, scared. And there was this. She handed over the torn paper. The detective's eyes narrowed as he read it. "Where did you find this?" He had it tied to his collar with a rubber band. There was a moment of heavy silence, and then, to her surprise, Detective Harris softened. "You don't know, do you?" he said quietly. "Know what?" she asked, heart thudding. He took a deep breath, then sat down. "That dog, we've been tracking him all morning. We didn't know where he'd go, but we never expected him to end up here, especially not in the middle of your shift." Dr. Lewis blinked. "What do you mean my shift?" He leaned forward. "This isn't random. That puppy came here, to you, for a reason." The words hit her like a punch. Before she could respond, the puppy stirred, let out a soft yelp, and then he did something strange. He leapt from her arms and darted toward the office door. The security guard opened a crack, and the puppy slipped out into the hallway, as if he knew where he was going. "Wait," Dr. Lewis called, chasing after him. They followed the tiny blur of fur down the corridor, past the nurse's station, past the imaging rooms, until he stopped in front of a door labeled Room 208. He barked, once, twice, then sat down and stared. Dr. Lewis reached out and slowly opened the door. Inside was a woman in her mid-30s, lying pale and unconscious in a hospital bed. Her chart read, Samantha Keller, unknown patient, admitted 3 hours ago, found unconscious in a warehouse, no ID, and on the windowsill, a folded hoodie, faded, dirty, on the sleeve, in small hand-sewn letters, Buddy. Dr. Lewis turned slowly to the detective. His face was grim. We think that's his owner. The puppy, Buddy, as the sleeve on the hoodie revealed, refused to leave the doorway. He didn't bark again, didn't whine. He just sat there, tail still, staring at the woman in the hospital bed, like his entire world depended on whether or not she opened her eyes. Dr. Lewis stepped quietly into the room, her shoes whispering against the tile. The machines beat gently. Samantha Keller's chest rose and fell, slow and mechanical. Tubes ran into her arms. A monitor ticked beside her, but she wasn't waking up. The detective entered behind her. We found her in an abandoned warehouse across town, barely alive. Someone called it in anonymously. She'd been there at least a day. And you think the dog let someone there? Harris shook his head. No, he ran. After she collapsed, we believe he went for help, but didn't find anyone. Until now. Dr. Lewis looked back at Buddy, her voice soft. But why here? Why me? The detective hesitated, then pulled out a crumpled photograph from his jacket pocket. Because of this, it was old, torn on the edges. A photo of a young woman, Samantha, smiling in front of a food truck. Behind her was a little girl, maybe 7 years old, and next to the girl stood a familiar face. Dr. Lewis, her own breath caught. She took the photo, examining it with disbelief. That was her, long hair in a ponytail, arms wrapped around a giggling child she could barely remember now. Her volunteer summer in college. She used to tutor kids at a community shelter. And Samantha had been one of the older girls who helped in the kitchen. I haven't seen her in over 10 years, she whispered. She remembered you, the detective said, and maybe so did he. She turned to Buddy again. He was still staring at Samantha, motionless. Suddenly, he stood, walked slowly to the edge of the bed. With trembling paws, he placed one on the side of the mattress and nudged her hand gently with his nose. The room was silent. Then, a twitch. Samantha's fingers flinched. Dr. Lewis's eyes widened. Did you see that? The nurse monitoring her vitals looked up from her tablet. BP spike. Heart rate just elevated slightly. She's responding. Buddy wagged his tail once, just once, then lowered his head beside her hand, curling into the blankets like he'd finally arrived where he needed to be. Tears welled up in Dr. Lewis's eyes. The detective stepped back, his voice low. He never gave up. No one else came looking for her. Not a soul. But this little dog. He crossed the city, somehow found the right hospital, and the one person who had a connection to her. All just to make sure she didn't die alone. There it was. The weight of the problem hit Dr. Lewis like a wave. This wasn't about a random stray running scared into a hospital. This was about loyalty, about memory, about love that refuses to quit, even when the odds are against you. It was about a dog who remembered the one person who'd once helped as human and believed she might return the favor. Dr. Lewis couldn't stop staring at the little dog curled up at the edge of the bed. His eyes, wide and full of unspoken emotion, never left Samantha's face. It was as if Buddy knew something far beyond the ordinary capabilities of a dog, something that connected him to the woman in the bed in a way that neither Dr. Lewis nor the detectives could quite explain. The nurse, who had been monitoring the patient's vitals, finally spoke up, breaking the heavy silence. Her heart rate stabilizing, but it's still not a good sign. We need to figure out what's going on with her brain activity. I've seen this before when a person's in a coma, but they're still aware. It's like they're stuck between two worlds. Two worlds, Dr. Lewis murmured, her thoughts spinning. The detective, standing by the door with arms crossed, looked back at the nurse. So you're saying she might be conscious, but can't respond? Exactly. But if she's truly in there, the nurse's voice trailed off as she glanced at Buddy, who was still pressed against Samantha's side, breathing steadily. It could be that she's waiting for something. Dr. Lewis's heart pounded. Waiting for what? The nurse only shrugged. It could be anything. A sound, a voice, a touch. The tension in the room was palpable, thickening with each passing second. What did this dog know? How had Buddy found Samantha? And why had he picked this moment to return? Was it just coincidence? Or was there a deeper connection at play? I don't think this is coincidence, the detective said, his voice low and thoughtful. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the little dog. "I've been in this line of work long enough to know when something doesn't add up. You said this dog came all the way from a warehouse, right? And yet, he doesn't act like a typical stray. He acts like he knows her, like he's been looking for her." Dr. Lewis nodded slowly, her mind racing. "But that's impossible. How could he?" Before she could finish, Buddy stood up again, his tiny body trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. He jumped up onto the hospital bed, careful not to disturb Samantha too much. His eyes flicked from Dr. Lewis to the detective, and then back to Samantha's hand. He nudged it again, this time more persistently, as if urging her to wake up. The sound of sirens wailing outside startled everyone in the room. "What in the world?" the detective muttered, stepping toward the window. The city's emergency lights reflected off the glass, casting an eerie glow across the sterile walls. "It's a lockdown," the nurse said, her voice tightening with alarm. "The whole area's been closed off." Dr. Lewis felt a strange chill run down her spine. "Lockdown? Why?" She rushed to the window with the detective. What she saw sent a jolt of unease through her entire body. Dozens of police cars surrounded the hospital. Officers were pouring out of the vehicles, moving with purpose and determination, as if preparing for something. But what? The air outside seemed thick with tension, as though the entire world had shifted into something unrecognizable. "There's something happening," the detective murmured, his brow furrowed. "And I think we're about to find out what it is." As Dr. Lewis turned back to Samantha's bed, she noticed Buddy was no longer looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the door, on the hallway, where the sound of hurried footsteps echoed. Her breath caught. "The police, they know something, don't they? They're looking for someone." The detective's lips pressed together. "They could be looking for the person who put her in this condition. We thought it was a random attack, but maybe we were wrong." Dr. Lewis's heart skipped a beat. A random attack. Samantha had been found barely alive, left to die in a forgotten warehouse. But was it really random? Was it connected to something? Someone close to her? As the footsteps grew louder, Dr. Lewis couldn't shake the sense of dread building in her chest. She glanced at Buddy, who now had his ears pinned back. His tail stiffened as if anticipating danger. Before she could say another word, the door to Samantha's room opened, and two uniformed officers entered. Their eyes immediately went to the dog. The tension was thick enough to slice through with a knife. "We need to talk to the patient," one of the officers said curtly. "We have some questions regarding her involvement in an ongoing investigation. We have reason to believe she might be a witness." Dr. Lewis's head spun. "A witness?" The detective moved closer. "A witness to what?" Before the officer could answer, another voice interrupted from the hallway. "You can't just bring her into questioning." A young woman appeared at the door, her face pale, her eyes wide. She was out of breath, holding a folder clutched tightly against her chest. "What is it, Miss Taylor?" the officer snapped. The woman, shaking, looked at Dr. Lewis. I just came from the morgue. There's something you all need to see." The room fell silent. Dr. Lewis's mind was racing. What had this woman just said? And why was she carrying such an ominous expression? She felt her pulse quicken. "What's in that folder?" "Everything," the woman whispered, her voice cracking. "Everything about Samantha's past, and the truth about what happened to her." Buddy's tail wagged slowly. For the first time in hours, Dr. Lewis felt like there was a flicker of hope, but there was still so much left to uncover. The mystery was only deepening, and as the moments ticked by, Dr. Lewis knew that whatever came next would shake everything she thought she knew about this woman and the dog who refused to leave her side. The room was on edge. The air felt thick with expectation as the young woman, Miss Taylor, stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the folder to her chest. Her face was pale, her hand trembling slightly. Dr. Lewis could feel the weight of the moment, the unknown answers hanging like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Miss Taylor's voice cracked, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Buddy, who was now standing at Samantha's bedside. The puppy was no longer trembling. Instead, he seemed calm, almost protective, watching the newcomer closely. He stepped forward, as if he could sense the tension in the air. "What's in the folder?" the detective demanded, stepping forward to stand beside Dr. Lewis. His voice was sharp, but his eyes were filled with curiosity. Miss Taylor swallowed hard, her breath shallow. I don't know how to say this, but this folder contains the truth about Samantha's life. She's not just a victim of a random attack. She's someone who had been running from a past she couldn't escape. Someone dangerous was after her." Dr. Lewis could feel her heart race. Was this why the police were so interested in Samantha? Were they looking for the person who had attacked her? Without another word, Miss Taylor slowly opened the folder, revealing a stack of papers photographs, and documents. Everything they needed to piece together the mystery that had plagued them all. She pulled out a photograph and handed it to Dr. Lewis. It was a picture of Samantha, but not the smiling woman they had seen earlier. This Samantha was different. Her eyes were filled with terror, as if she had seen something so horrifying that it had scarred her deeply. And standing next to her, a man, his face partially obscured, but his posture and presence exuded authority and menace. The man in this photo, Miss Taylor said, her voice dropping to a whisper, is someone Samantha knew very well. A man who wasn't just a threat to her, but to everyone around her. His name is Victor Stone. He's connected to a dangerous underground network, one that's involved in illegal trafficking. Samantha tried to escape, tried to sever all ties, but they wouldn't let her go. Dr. Lewis felt her stomach churn. She knew a man like that? Miss Taylor nodded grimly. She knew him all too well. They had history, but not the kind anyone should ever have. He kept tabs on her, watched her every move. And then, one day, she disappeared. Disappeared. The detective's eyes widened in realization. Is this why she was left for dead? Yes, Miss Taylor interrupted, her voice barely audible. Samantha was found in that warehouse because she tried to escape. She had finally gathered enough evidence to expose Victor Stone's criminal activities. But when he found out, her words trailed off. Buddy, who had been sitting quietly at Samantha's side, now let out a low whimper, his ears drooping. The sound was so heart-wrenching that it made everyone pause. We need to get her out of here, the detective said urgently. If Stone knows she's alive, we're in danger. She's not just a witness anymore. She's the key to bringing down a major criminal network. Dr. Lewis turned to Miss Taylor. Why didn't you bring this to us sooner? Miss Taylor seemed to shrink under the weight of the question. I didn't know who to trust, she admitted. Samantha didn't want anyone involved. She tried to protect herself, but Stone had eyes everywhere. I didn't want to risk her safety even more. Buddy's eyes shifted between Dr. Lewis and the detective, then back to Samantha. The puppy let out a soft bark, as if trying to communicate something urgent. The room was now filled with a new sense of urgency. The walls, once sterile and comforting, now felt like a trap. The sirens outside grew louder, and the unmistakable sound of police radios echoed down the hall. The situation had escalated far beyond what anyone had expected. Get her out of here, now, the detective barked, turning toward the door. We need to move fast. Stone's men will be here any minute. Dr. Lewis glanced at the puppy, whose fur seemed to bristle with anxiety. She had a sense that Buddy wasn't just a companion in this moment. He was Samantha's protector. He had somehow known, in a way they couldn't quite understand, that Samantha was in danger. As the team moved quickly to prepare Samantha for transfer, the weight of the situation settled heavily on Dr. Lewis's shoulders. She had always thought of herself as someone who could solve problems, find answers, and heal people. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The mystery surrounding Samantha's life and the connection to the puppy was nothing short of a tangled web of danger, betrayal, and love. Buddy, the little dog who had started it all, remained by Samantha's side. He had brought them all together, and now he was leading them into the unknown. The clock was ticking, and the world outside the hospital was closing in fast. As the team scrambled to move Samantha to a safe location, Dr. Lewis couldn't shake the image of the puppy from her mind. Buddy, who had started the chain of events, now stood like a sentry beside her. His eyes were fixed on the door, his small frame tense with anticipation. She couldn't help but feel that the little dog knew more than anyone else in the room, more than even the detectives or the doctors. Samantha, still weak and disoriented, was being wheeled down the corridor, her breathing shallow but steady. As she passed by Dr. Lewis, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of recognition, of understanding. Samantha knew that she wasn't just escaping from one danger. She was running toward another. A truth that had been buried for far too long was now on the verge of coming to light. The hospital's doors burst open, and a convoy of police vehicles sped toward the entrance. They'd managed to stay ahead of Victor Stone's men for now, but Dr. Lewis knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and constant updates. The police had arrested several members of the underground network linked to Stone, but the investigation was far from over. Samantha's role as a witness was now more critical than ever, and the information she carried could bring down a whole criminal empire. Dr. Lewis found herself back at the hospital, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years surging through her. She had always been a healer, but today, she felt like she was part of something much larger, something that could change lives, save futures, and protect the innocent. But as the case progressed, it became clear that the true hero of the story wasn't a detective or a doctor. It was Buddy, the little puppy who had run into the hospital that fateful day. Buddy's loyalty to Samantha, his instinctive need to protect her, was the catalyst for everything that followed. Without him, no one would have known where to start. He had connected the dots between a terrified woman and a corrupt network, bridging the gap between a victim and the safety she so desperately needed. In the weeks that followed, Samantha began to recover, both physically and emotionally. The trauma of her past would take time to heal, but with Buddy by her side, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The bond between them had been forged in the most unexpected of circumstances, and together, they would rebuild a life free from the shadows of their past. Dr. Lewis often thought about the little dog, who had turned out to be so much more than just a lost puppy. He had saved a life, uncovered a mystery, and helped expose a world of darkness. But there was still so much more to do. The battle wasn't over. The danger hadn't passed. But now there was hope. Hope for Samantha. Hope for others trapped in the same world of fear and secrecy. And most importantly, hope for Buddy, a small dog who had walked into a hospital and changed everything. As Dr. Lewis sat in her office, the phone rang once again. It was a reminder that the work was far from over. But this time, when she looked out the window, she smiled. She knew that with Buddy by her side, she could face whatever came next. As the story of Buddy and Samantha closes a chapter, there are countless other animals out there, waiting for their moment to shine. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Paws and Claws for more emotional journeys of courage, loyalty, and the unspoken bond between pets and their human companions. You won't want to miss the next chapter.